The final main item is number 8, which is the community cohesion. If I can get to the paper. So this again comes under the general category of making sure criminal justice works for our communities, and indeed community cohesion is a priority within the current police and crime plan. And in fact, 40% of people who responded to our consultation last year said that they felt a greater sense of community would help make them feel safer. So clearly something that the public have picked up on, and obviously we do have very diverse communities here in West Yorkshire, and indeed we had a recent event with the voluntary and third sector that was really well attended. Chief Constable was there as well, and there's a huge appetite for joint working and improving community cohesion. Catherine, I think you're going to update again, aren't you, on this one? Yeah, okay.
So again, just to pull out some of the highlights really, I think the very first paragraph really encapsulates what community cohesion is all about really. It is about a sense of belonging to a place or a group or a community. And it is about building better relationships between communities, both new and settled. And we have got a really diverse set of communities across West Yorkshire, so community cohesion for us, and we know from history, is really, really important. And I think it's very much linked to well-being of a place as well. So I think that wider partnership aspect of, if people are healthier, are more engaged with each other, feel more involved in local institutions like schools, for example. People tend to help each other more, don't they, to get kids ready for school and so on. And all those kind of things are really important in that sense of a place feeling well, if you like. And I think that does link into community cohesion. Obviously, if a community is cohesive, it follows, like you said earlier on, Commissioner, that people feel safer. And so clearly we've got a really key role to play in helping with community cohesion along with our partners. And one of the things that I'd really like the neighbourhood officers and PCSOs to do, so when I'm talking about the kinds of things, the skills that I think they need moving forward, this is about them being coaches and mentors in communities, because actually there are some really good skills within our communities that we perhaps don't exploit as much as we could do. And people just need a little bit of a helping hand to understand where a bit of funding might be available, or how to kind of galvanise a street or a locality. We've had some really good examples, haven't we, over a number of years. It's not new, in terms of people taking a little bit of ownership for just a small area in the middle of a group of houses, and all of a sudden you take a bit of ownership back of that place, it becomes less likely to be burgled and vandalised, etc., etc. So there's already some really very seemingly simple but good examples which just need a little bit of a helping hand to get going, and then communities can be more sustainable. So I guess that's the overarching aim for us, and I think it's then more likely that communities come together and solve problems with us, because very often the solutions to many of the problems lie within communities, and it's just unlocking those and helping people become active citizens, which I know is something that we're really keen to push moving forward. Neighbourhood policing is obviously a key part of this, as is engagement, and I've touched on that already. There'll be a short video that will be going out alongside a survey about engagement. So when I talked earlier on about asking the public about how do you want us to engage with you and not just assuming we know, that will be an opportunity for the public to let us have their views. That will inform the engagement strategy, and also from that we'll develop a toolkit, which again, I think you mentioned earlier on about that consistency across areas, about this is the kind of, the tools that are in your bag to help you engage at different levels in your communities. So, like I said, there's already some really good work going on across the force. A lot of the paper links back to the neighbourhood strategy that I've already talked about, so I won't rehearse that again. Suffice to say that it's part of the work moving forward and really important for us in terms of neighbourhood policing moving forward.
Right, thank you. Well, within the report, like I said, there are big crossovers with the previous reports around the neighbourhood policing team review. But you refer to sort of key individuals, and I think you've already sort of started to describe this, Catherine, but can you just say a bit more around that with regards to what it is meant in the report?
Yeah, so key individuals for us are people, and they can be anybody within our communities, who are willing and are happy to engage with us and then perhaps spread that message to people who might not have the time or the inclination to engage with us, but still it's important that they hear our messages. And they can be people who are influential in communities. They might be very obvious people, you know, community leaders, but not always. There's sometimes just a person in the street who's, you know, might be a home watch coordinator, that kind of thing. And how we go about identifying them? Well, part of it is just because of neighbourhood officers and PCSO's knowledge from having spent time in a place. And part of it is by overlaying lots of different partnership data from the third sector, from strategic health assessments, census information, from faith-based organisations, etc. So we look to areas where we prioritise where we think key people in those areas can give us you know, the best bang for buck, if you like.
Yeah.
And then we look to our neighbourhood officers and our local officers in terms of housing and so on to identify who are the people that can spread the message in those communities. So that's what we mean by key networks and communities.
Right, thanks for that. You described on page 3, and you referred to it around the launch of a social media video. We'd certainly like to work with you on that, because obviously as part of my role, so I'm currently out there asking about the precepts for council tax, but the Your Views survey. So it would be good just to make sure we're singing from the same hymn sheet on that. But I absolutely support that concept of doing engagement through as many sort of mediums as we can.
Yeah.
So I just ask you to
just to reassure you, we're really linked in with the engagement staff here, so they're fully aware of that and been helping us to develop it. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
You also in the report talk about reaching what we sometimes deem as marginalised communities in promoting community cohesion, and the Connecting Communities programme that is referred to as well. And obviously that can involve migrant communities, LGBTQ communities, and lots of others through the diversity that we have through community cohesion. So can you just say a bit more about how we will intend to do that?
Yes, so the couple there that you've already mentioned, perhaps by way of example, it's not always an entire community we might want to focus on. We might, so for example, we're doing some work to identify young people who might then be susceptible to becoming part of an organised crime group, for example, as they get older. So we're targeting them as a community, if you like. They might not all live in the same place, but they're a community in themselves. They're a group of people who we know we need to work with in order to prevent harm coming to them in the future. Similarly, around firearms and weapons, especially knives in schools, that kind of thing. So there's that kind of engagement that goes on with those specific groups. Generally I've spoken before about there's many different groups across communities in West Yorkshire where neighbourhood staff are working on a smaller basis, but nevertheless working alongside groups to increase community cohesion. And then we have our strategic engagement officers who work across the neighbourhoods on themed areas such as young people and migrant communities, for example. So it's not always place-based. Sometimes it's a theme, sometimes it's a specific group of people. But they're the kind of array of people really that we work with in terms of increasing community cohesion.
Right, so you are looking at this across the piece and perhaps moving away from some of the more traditional sort of perceptions of that. Okay, that's good, thanks. And then finally, are you doing any specific work around trying to increase public confidence?
I think a key part, obviously, is the investment into neighbourhood policing, because that real key aspect of neighbourhood policing about being visible and familiar and accessible is something that, you know, whilst people, if they ring 101 or 999 want a police officer, quite often they're in a difficult situation and they don't care what police officer it is, as long as somebody comes and helps. Whereas actually, in terms of increasing community confidence, they want to see a familiar face that they trust and they're able to talk to, and they're able to raise concerns around, you know, really difficult issues. Sometimes, you know, perhaps that they're concerned about somebody who might be experiencing domestic abuse and they don't want to tell anybody else. They might want to pass some intelligence about people that they're concerned about, you know, the behaviour that they're exhibiting. So that real investment into neighbourhood policing and a very clear role for those officers and PCSOs, I think, is really important in terms of increasing community confidence across the board.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I asked that question is that, as you know, in another forum, we reported on decreasing confidence levels, you know, and I'm the first to say that, you know, the cuts that we've had to implement because of government funding, you know, there's no doubt has had a big impact on that. But it comes back to, in order to try and readdress some of this, are the people who are going to be in these neighbourhood teams clear that this is one of the key aspects of not just being there, but the engagement that they need to undertake in their areas?
Yeah, they're very clear, and they will be moving forward.
Okay.
It's a really key part of the neighbourhood strategy moving forward, so yeah, they will be really clear.
Okay, good to hear that. Right, Jane?
No.
All right. You'll be pleased to know that's the final question for today from me.